Hi everybody, and welcome to this Food Focus webinar. We're really great. It's really great to have you with us again on this Wednesday afternoon. I think it's Wednesday. I'm not sure because I'm sitting in Sydney and I couldn't actually tell you what the time of day is in South Africa. It's a little bit upside down. I think it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're sitting in the studio with Syspro once again, who have kindly sponsored this webinar on using technology in good distribution practices. We're going to be going through a couple of slides together, and I'm going to be introducing you to the presenter, Doug Hunter. It's good to see that we've got a number of people online with us. I know we had quite a few that registered today, and we were hoping that they're all going to join us, but we're going ahead with the broadcast and we're going to record live, record this webinar, and we'll make sure that it's up on our website anyway for those of you that weren't able to join us. I can see a couple more people coming online. Hi Russell, Nikki, Mia, good to have you with us, and I'm sure you're looking forward to hearing this presentation as well. Alessa, won't you move the slides on just so we can go through the rules so everybody understands what to do with in the webinar. Please make sure that you can hear us. If you can't hear us, it might be because your speakers are not on or your volume is not up. Perhaps you've muted yourself. Please make sure that you have maximized the window by using the right hand upper corner of the slide window, because that gives you the best opportunity to see the presentation. All of you should be able to see what is on the screen now, and you can always restore it to normal once we're finished. In terms of the way that the presentation works, moving to the next slide, you'll see that there is a question button on your menu, and there's a chat window. If you chat during the course of the presentation, that's fine. You'll just type in just like you would do a live chat. If you do have a specific question, please can I ask you to rather use the question drop down, because that way we can go through the questions at the end of the session. Don't forget, the webinar is being recorded, and we'll send you out the link so that you can access it after the presentation. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce to you today our very important presenter. So moving to the next slide, you can get a sneak preview of Doug. Hi Doug, and it's really great to meet you. Doug is responsible for professional services at Syspro Africa. He's a manufacturing and logistics business professional. He's not really an IT tech guy, as he says, but we'll see how that goes today. I'm really interested in his passion, and that is helping you as organizations to discover and implement innovation. And you do this obviously using people, processes, as well as business IT. And we're going to be focusing on, how you can really use IT to make it smarter. What is very interesting about Doug is that he enjoys all of those things, but not at the same time. Obviously, I think it could be quite dangerous to ride and mountain bike, and it's definitely not a good idea to drive and drink malt whiskey. As you'll hear shortly, Doug is a Scottishman, which obviously explains his love of malt whiskey. Doug, thank you and welcome to Food Focus. We look forward to hearing your presentation. It's over to you.
Thanks, Linda. Yes, I don't drink very often when I'm mountain biking, but tried it once and broke 6 ribs, so I won't do that today. It's good to be here. I'm just going to take you through a few slides on basically the distribution of food and some ideas, well, the things you need to think of and some of the things that go right and some of the things that go wrong. Whilst we enable them with Syspro ERP, it's not always the ERP. In fact, it hardly ever is the ERP or the IT that goes wrong. However, I'm going to take you through farm to fork, which most people would call the food supply chain. It's not just going to the store and buying it or just making it. What is a reputable distributor? supply chain of food, or in fact any supply chain, is about two areas. One is moving it and the other is storing it. So you either store it somewhere or you move it and then people consume it. And then I'll talk about some inventory basics in the food distribution business in particular, which are relevant. And then a brief ending, because you might be interested in the difference between food security and food defense, because that's becoming more and more important. So if we were to look at a diagram of the food supply chain, it starts typically at a farm, not always, but it could be animals, it could be grain, it could be fruit, it could be vegetables, it can be a number of things. They are harvested, slaughtered, or whatever. They are typically processed into something, so pigs into bacon, grain into bread, maybe even oats into malt whiskey. But they're processed, and in that process there's typically some sort of mixing process or conversion process of things in bulk, and then it's packaged into easily purchasable quantities and sent to consumers. Some foods are actually made as ingredients to other processing plants, so that processing part can be, 2 or 3 repeats in different places. Distribution, often by truck, not necessarily. It could be down a barge down the Rhine, it could be on a train. And then if it's food, it often arrives in some sort of store where the end consumer buys it. So let's just say it's a retail outlet, a supermarket, a Pick and Pay or a ShopRite or a Spar globally. And then the consumer buys it and then stores it again, typically in a fridge or a cupboard, and then eats it. So we would look at that, and in between each of those stages is a handover from one, I suppose, party, company, legal entity to the next. It's not just suddenly food arrives on the table. The farm to fork food supply chain. So I said a bit about agriculture. So there's the production of the primary or bulk products. So if you were to think of wine, for example, in South Africa, Distell own a number of wine farms that we would know very well here. And they also buy grapes from other wine farms. So the agricultural part of the food supply chain often involves helping the guys do the agriculture. So Woolworths, for example, might buy wine or something from a producer. They might say, well, actually, all we want to do is rent your land. We'll do everything on the land and actually produce the food for them. So often it's not the farmer that actually does the food. And that's in order to get higher yields, more organic probably these days, less chemicals in the fertilizers, more organic fertilizers, and also to get higher yields and better quality. Bulk storage and transport. So you see silos for grain, you see those all over many countries, America, Europe, South Africa, all over Africa, in fact, because when you harvest grain, you're harvesting hundreds of hectares, thousands maybe, and you can't ship it immediately somewhere, so you store it temporarily in a silo typically, and then that silo you will convert it, move it to a truck. Once again, there's an opportunity to lose the food there because you can have spillage. You can also have contaminants go in at that point as well into the truck, or you could be using a very ropey transport company and they might not have very hygienic trucks. So there's a lot can go wrong way down the supply chain or way up the supply chain. Then you get to food processing and packaging, and typically most of us have seen that either personally or on TV. Usually very hygienic, controlled, subject to many regulations, Food and Drug Administration. And there are a lot of regulations in food, not just as many as in pharmaceutical. The food is processed. It could be soups, for example. One of our customers who produces mushrooms also produces soups for Woolworths. And so they use the mushrooms and a whole pile of other ingredients, and they make them in maybe a 3-ton vessel. They make a big vat of soup, same as you would at home. Then they package it. But you can understand that in a factory environment, it's quite difficult to, you can make your kitchen clean, but to make a factory clean is a real full-time process. And the danger there, of course, is bacteria, and listeriosis was one of the results we had in South Africa. Then we start, now we've actually made the product. So we've used the primary products, whatever they might be, apples, grapes, wheat, whatever it is. We've processed it, we might have made bread, we've packaged it, we've boxed it, and now we've got to start distributing it to consumers to eat. And the primary distribution is bulk. Typically, it's a manufacturer sending food probably from their mother warehouse. So in other words, after their manufacturing process, they'll have a warehouse of their own. And then they use that to buffer stock so that trucks can be filled and sent to the next person down the supply chain. If it's a big retail outlet and you're doing bread, they could possibly send a full truck directly to a Pick and Pay or a Spar outlet. But normally the bulk or primary distribution is sending a mix of goods from your manufacturing plant to the central distribution center of a retailer. And then the secondary or fine distribution is where the secondary process happens. In other words, the retailer takes your products and maybe 150 other products, loads them on a truck and sends them to their own outlet. So they're distributing many different products from many different manufacturers. Then we go along and we are persuaded, or we know what we want to buy, and we're persuaded by advertising and merchandising to buy 50% of what we don't need. And then we consume it. And unfortunately, we throw quite a lot of it away. So, and sometimes people oversupply a supermarket, and particularly for short shelf life items like yogurts, milk, butter, all those sort of things, even vegetables, and particularly processed vegetables, where there are not many preservatives in them. The actual shelf life, in other words, the time on the shelf that gives the consumer long enough to consume the thing, is too short. They will typically reverse logistics for oversupply where you can reuse it, but for yogurts and things, typically it will be recycled to charity or something like that. And I thought, because we were at a conference recently, you might be interested knowing that, which I found surprising, that in South Africa, 35% of all food that's produced is wasted. It goes to a landfill or it rots at the side of the road or somewhere else, which is quite frightening. And that's not just what we throw away at the end of the supply chain. That's all that spillage I told you about on the way through. So I also looked at the States and I thought, well, we must be worse than the rest of the world. But surprisingly, they're 31%, so they're just as bad. So that's kind of how it works. So what makes a reputable distributor? So a distributor could be somebody like RCL Foods, who do chickens and I'm trying to think, the Yum Yum peanut butter, and they do salad creams. They do a whole pile of stuff, and they also do breads and baked stuff as well. For their fresh foods, they have trucks that will deliver ambient temperature goods, in other words, room temperature, chilled, which should probably be about 4 degrees, and frozen, which should be minus many. I'm not sure just what it is. Maybe it's 18 in our fridge, in our deep freeze, 30 in a proper freezer area, but it's probably somewhere around 15 to 18 degrees minus, that is. So they have a truck with 3 different temperature chambers so that they can have a mix of foods. So you could have that, and they therefore distribute a pile of their own products. They keep it under control. They deliver to distribution centers for other for the retailers, or they distribute them to the stores of the retailers themselves. And that means they do it yourself. They're doing everything really. They make it and then they distribute it almost to the end consumer. So they deliver to the point of retail anyway, not consumption. Many other customers would be a third-party logistics service provider. So a lot of food manufacturers will make their food, look after all the hygiene, do all the right things, package it, do the branding, do the marketing, do the multi-channel marketing, do the white labeling or no-name brands. But they don't want to do the logistics because they think that's not their core competence. So they'll outsource to somebody, you know, Imperial, UTI, who've changed the name, or let's think, Supergroup, DHL, there's a pile of them. And they'll let those third-party logistics guys probably supply the vehicles and manage the distribution to the retail distribution centers or the stores. They may even take the orders as well. In fact, quite often they take the orders for that company's food as well. So there's quite a close relationship there. And they're typically not small guys, they're also big corporates. Or you could be a hybrid, you could make your own products and distribute them in bulk, only in full containers or full trucks to retailers or whoever, or big users. You know, bread you could deliver to factories, whatever, or cafeterias, whatever. And then somebody else does it from the retailer to the store, sorry, the retail DC to the stores. So as I said, there's store and move. So some of these 3PLs, well, you could actually, they'll run your warehouse as well as run the transport. So, you know, you've got to look, you can do just the transport or you can do the distribution. Now, the thing you have to ask yourself as a food manufacturer or distributor is, what am I good at? What do I want to spend my time at? And how do I get this working best for my end consumer? Well, some of the things you have to think about are driver and vehicle compliance. It's your brand that's going down the road. Even if it's an unbranded vehicle, if it gets to the end and it's damaged, the bread's all crushed, the cases are open, then that's a problem. So you have to consider the driver and vehicle compliance of whom you use, whether it's you or somebody else. And then there's the health and the cold chain. So if you've got frozen goods in particular, it's wonderful if you make them, you put them in a truck, the truck's frozen, the cold chain is contained, the temperature is always kept at below -18, and then you get to Santon and you stick it on the pavement for 3 hours and it thaws out before it's then refrozen in somebody's freezer in the retailer. If you get that, you're going to have problems. So you have to consider these things if you outsource your logistics. And food security I'll talk about at the end, but it's really maintaining that nobody contaminates or damages your food. The next one is reputable distributor. Oh, sorry, I've said that. Chains, the one thing I wanted to say was any one of these people can drop you in the poo. So as a chain is, as you know, it's a line of links, and any one link can drop you. So you have to be very careful. Once you outsource some of these activities, you have to have a very close relationship. And typically you have a lot of collaboration, or is aided by collaboration between those third-party organizations and yourself with your IT. So you quite often find third-party logistics service providers might be using Syspro or one of our partners in the warehouse with their warehousing solution, not their own. So if you're looking at storage, and I'm not just talking about the shop, I'm talking about a warehouse. So handling, you have to look at handling, spoilage, damage, shrinkage. So shrinkage is loss, is dropping pallets, dropping cases where you'll damage stuff. Theft is shrinkage. If you allow for theft, if you don't have security, food's quite nice to steal. The other good thing about food is it's very handy for people in the warehouse to eat before they distribute it. So you've got to have quite tight controls that people don't just eat what's in the warehouse as well. Spoilage, bad planning, if you've got short or any products with shelf lives. If you've got bad planning and you don't pick the right stuff first, it ends up going off in your warehouse and you can't, or somebody's warehouse, and you can't sell it. So handling is how damage happens, in particular handling with forklifts. You know, you better to pick up the pallet, not the bottom layer of your flour, and spill it all over the floor. So again, you've got to look for people who do that properly, and luckily there's plenty of people who do that well in this country, in South Africa anyway. And then the process in a store is put away, picking, packing, shipping. So when you put it away, it's when you've received it from somebody. You want to put it away as quick as you can. You then want to pick it at a later date. So you're typically receiving in bulk from a supplier, or in our case, from a food manufacturer to a retail DC, distribution center. They would receive that and put it in shelves. Then at a later point, they get orders and they pick orders and load delivery trucks to ship many products. So you're putting away 1 or 2 products, and you probably, when you do the picking, you could be picking 50 products out of the warehouse. So it's a far more, the outbound side of a warehouse is far more busy than an inbound. and you would pack and ship. Now, one of the things that companies do is if you have short shelf life products, if you do have to send them to an intermediate distribution center, it's quite often that you don't actually put it in a rack at all. When it arrives, you already know which customer orders you're going to fill. So you cross-dock it from the sort of indoors to the outdoors, rather than doing a whole pile of putting away and picking. So there's a lot you can do. And then you have to think about, how do you pick it? Do you just go and pick the nearest thing? No, your system will tell you that if you've got first in, first out, which is typically what people use, you know, the stuff that arrives first is the stuff you pick first. Otherwise, it's likely to be there longer. I mean, the packaging will go off, whatever. It maybe the product doesn't go off, but typically most people work on FIFO. If you've got shelf, it would be first expiry, first out. So sometimes you receive orders in a warehouse where the expiry date is in a couple of weeks, but you've already got stuff in the warehouse where the expiry is actually 4 weeks. So you've got 4 weeks to keep that. So rather you would use the latest stuff. You wouldn't use FIFO, you would use the first expiry date and pick that. So, you know, systems would help do that. And a key thing there is that's just inside the warehouse. There is no point putting products on a shelf in a retailer if there's like 1 day left to consume, and that often happens because, you know, if you buy milk with 1 day to go, it's maybe not going to last that well. Some people, and something you might need to think about, is the effect of batches. Sometimes customers will ask for, I mean, us as the retailers to fill their stores, will ask a food manufacturer, don't send me a delivery with more than 1 batch in it. So if you've been making soups, make sure all the soups come from that 1 mix, not from 3 different mixes. And that's kind of to reduce the probability of problems if you do need to recall the stuff. So there's a lot of traceability so that you can see what product went where. But one of the key things that comes out is this: how many batches do you allow per order? Some people don't care, but some customers are very specific. I only want those items from 1 batch, and if I'm asking for 100 and there's only 80 in that batch, just give me 80. So that can lead to confusion. And of course, there's the environment, the temperature, cross-contamination, bugs, all the things that we find everywhere. In the food business, you have to control that. You can't have boiling hot warehouses with fresh products. So there's a lot of environmental control. There's a lot of handling that is legislated for, who can do what, how you do it. It's not just as straightforward as we might do in our house. And bugs are very difficult because they don't all fly around. As we've seen, bacteria are extremely difficult to eradicate, and that's something all food distributors are aware of. If you send the wrong stuff, getting returns, or if the guy thinks it's off for your customer, you send it back. Typically, you will quarantine it before you reuse it, and before you do disposal. So if it has been returned, you don't just sell it to somebody else. You will have to go through a quarantine process and say, yes, the packaging only was damaged. Actually, the bottles of wine are fine. We can sell them to someone else. So there is a process you have to handle, and you'd have to formally do that with the system as well. And you do that because everything to do with food is about brand as well. It's not just feeding people. It's a very heavily branded environment. So you have to protect your brands, not just the health of the consumer. And then I hit food defense, ensuring quality for non-contamination. So we'll talk about that again. So now you're going to move it. So now it's got through the warehouse in your distribution. So if you're a food distributor, what's happening on the truck? I've said about driver style and truck condition. Typically, food trucks are better than other trucks unless they're moving the thousands of avocados or oranges or whatever from Mpumalanga back to Johannesburg, where you see just 2 tons of oranges piled on top of each other. You just hope the ones you buy are somewhere in the middle, not at the top in the sun, or at the bottom crushed. So you've got to decide what you spend on the service provider to get the right type of truck condition, and drivers. Drivers can kill not just people, they can kill your business as well with destroying your food. And then on time and full, a lot of the retailers say if I've asked for, let's just say 10 items, and I've asked for a ton of each item or whatever the quantity is, they don't just want good, 9 of the items to be 1 ton and the last one is 800 kilograms, that would be a fail. They want to deliver your delivery, your service delivery. They'll say, no, I want all 10 and I want them all 100% fulfilled. In other words, I want a 1 ton of all 10. Most people measure delivery or delivery performance as if you get 9 out of the 10, that's 90%. But a lot of people use on time and full, which means if I get 9 correct and 1 is 5% out, that's a failure. So the whole order fails. It's a much tougher measure, but you find that a lot to keep people on their toes to get their service quality correct, so that the receiving party, usually a retailer, gets the right quantity, the right drop point, the right condition, and the right paperwork, or electronic paperwork, EDI. Truck security involves tamper-proof vehicles. If people can just jump on the back and use it as a taxi, that's not too clever. You've got tamper-proof, you've got seals. You can plan in the route that the truck never stops. But if it's going for more than 14 hours, I think it has to have more than one driver and it may have to stop. You don't want people sleeping under trees in little villages or rural areas where the truck can be hijacked. So truck security is about planning trucks and being careful about where it has to stop. If the truck breaks down, which happens, or you have an accident, you actually do need to have, as a food distributor, proper procedures to recover that product, or it will be, as they say, redistributed quite effectively in Africa by the people that see the truck. So you've got to have a quick response. It's not just a case of sending any old truck. You've got to have a really proper truck of the same quality that comes, picks the stuff up, you transfer the stuff properly, you maintain the food security, you maintain the quality of the food, everything. You don't just sort of make a last minute plan. So a good distributor will have a good idea how they're going to recover from an accident. Once again, that talks about the cold chain consistency. If it's a frozen food's being moved around, people think you can leave frozen food for a long time. You can't. It thaws very quickly in hot sun, and only some of it thaws and the other stuff doesn't. So you're going to have part of that product that's affected, and if you put it in another truck that's also a refrigerated truck, when it arrives at the end, it looks like everything was frozen, but some of it could have thawed, and you could have yourself a big problem. And handling spillage properly. Usually in accidents, some of it falls out, so you need to handle that properly. Some of it you may just leave and it will be redistributed. Then we get to things like managing the stock, which is why you would buy an ERP system. So you can rely on good people who think they know what they know and they've known it for years, but eventually when you get to a certain scale of operation, you have to have a good ERP system to help you manage inventory in the food distribution business. And some of the really basic things are planning batches that suit upstream suppliers or manufacturers. So if you're a retailer and you want to order something and it's packed in 100 cases per pallet and you want 210, rather just order 200, because then you'll get 2 full pallets shrink wrapped. The chances of any damage is much less. Yes, it's slightly less than you want, but don't order 210 cases because you'll get 10 loose cases that might get damaged, stolen, whatever. So typically in most manufacturing environments, you're always trying to order upstream, in other words, from a supplier, something that is convenient to the pack size that they produce, rather than just the number you need. And that avoids all the split pallet and boxes. Then I think this must be the simple, we've got a best practice in the world for not doing this properly, which is professional management of stock mix. So if you want to optimize food throughput and shelf life, you want to increase your stock turns. In other words, you want your stock to rotate often. Probably if you've got short shelf life, in other words, 1 week, few days. But if you've got 6 or 8 weeks of shelf life, or salad would be enough, you really want that stuff to turn 12 times a year. In other words, you don't want to have more than a month's stock necessarily of anything. You might even want days of stock of some items if you can replenish them every day from a supplier. So the trick here is to look at, if I've got 100 million rand to invest in my stock, I'm the accountant. If I've got the wrong mix it means that I've got too much of my slow-moving products and too little of the fast-moving products. So I may only be getting 30% customer delivery or service delivery. So in other words, I'm only 3 times out of 10 I actually supply proper full orders. Now that's not going to, you're not going to survive like that. So there's a lot of guesswork, but that's why you buy an ERP system. You set up the parameters like lead times and order points and the order quantity that you're going to order, preferably, as I said, that suits the supplier. Then you can get your stock mix so that you can work out how much stock do I need to keep to service the customers I have. And you can do that with some quite nifty little tools like forecasting and inventory optimization. And that will mean that if you've got your 100 million, you'll end up with, actually, you could probably reduce that to 50 million and still service your customers better, which is a saving all round, because now you're planning your stock properly. So stock mix, in other words, having the right quantity of everything that you should have that meets the sort of deliveries you're having to do, is really something people need to spend time on, planners need to spend time on. And you can't do it by guessing. There's quite a lot of stats, and that's why you would buy systems for that. And there's a huge return from that system. Dealing with traceability, again, that's not something you can guess. You can't put a number 5 in a box and hope that the stuff stays in the same box. So traceability is another system-enabled piece of functionality, knowing what went where when. So if you think of the listeriosis we had, and people wanted to return products, I don't know if you remember walking into a retailer the next week, so I won't name the names, but I went to one retailer who I would call probably the biggest in the country. I would say they deal with a much broader market, so they're dealing with all LSMs or all types of people, from those that don't have much money to those that have a lot of money. I went in there and there was still product on the shelf about 2 days later. I went to another place where I would say they only look at the top LSMs. In other words, they're looking for people with more money and whatever. And the shelf was empty, completely empty. And it said, due to the listeriosis, we don't believe we have it, but we've removed this stock from the shelf. And in fact, that was better, because I went back to the other retailer a day later and they'd done the same thing, but they just had an empty shelf. So now you're thinking, it doesn't tell me they're doing anything. So maybe they don't have proper traceability. I wonder if the stuff next to it's fraught as well, and I shouldn't eat that. So dealing with traceability in the distribution business of food is very serious. So you can probably work out who those are. But knowing that they had actively said there's nothing in this shelf, they didn't fill it up with something else. They said there's nothing in this shelf because we dealt with the problem. You know, so that's traceability. That's because they knew what was where when. In fact, they all do, but you need systems to do that, and you need people to react to those systems quickly. And there it is, rapid response and action to recalls. That happened better in some places than others. So another feature of software that would help you there is, how long would it take me, or how quickly can I find out what I need to recall? So in Syspro, we added a thing called mock recall, which says, I want to recall all the mushroom soup, or not mushroom soup, all the vegetable soup that we sent in the last 3 weeks. And it will tell you all the batches that were made in the 3 weeks, who they all went to, who got them, and you could then say, right, I can communicate with all these people and get the stuff back. Know and control your people access to maximize food security. You have to be sure that you're not letting the wrong people into anywhere where there is food. Unfortunately, you have to let people in a retailer because we shop, so we all get let in. But up until that point, there's a lot of access control to make sure that food doesn't get stolen or tampered with. So you get handovers, you pick it in a warehouse, you put it in a cage often, or a marked area, not necessarily a cage. You hand it over and say, I've picked these 50 items, and somebody else says, yes, I've got these 50 items, and then they put them in the truck, and that guy says, yes, I've got 50 items. And all three are from different, well, they're different legal entities. So you're trying to change ownership, but that can get messed around as well. So finally, I thought I'd tell you the difference between food defense and food security. It's quite easy. Food defense, the FDA uses the term food defense to mean the efforts to protect food from intentional acts of adulteration. So logistics, traceability, grey market product could be one of those. So years ago, those of you that drank Smirnoff Ice may not have realized that if you'd gone to the Isle of Corfu or Ibiza, that quite a lot of they didn't actually sell Smirnoff Ice in Ibiza or Corfu, but there was a lot of going from South Africa, and I think it was Diageo or whoever owned them, had to change the rules because that was us doing grey marketing. We were, a lot of people in South Africa, independent guys, were buying vast quantities of Smirnoff Ice here and shipping it independently themselves to other markets. Now, the corporates don't typically like that. They like to produce food and manage the distribution locally or globally themselves, because grey marketed product often falls into disreputable hands, and therefore, again, you need traceability. So that's one of the things you would use. And tagging and seals and containers is another thing. You want to know when the door was opened. So to be honest, it's not a lot of use if the tag's broken and you say, well, someone's been in here, if you don't know what he did or she did. So now, in fact, SA Breweries did this for years. They had a transmitter on the back of the door, so every time anybody opened the door, it sent a GPS signal and said the door's just been opened. And you could probably work out, as long as you were watching the screen, whether that was a good place or a bad place to open it. So food security is about preventing against intentional acts of problems to your food. Whereas food security is more about food safety, and it's concerned with the unintentional adulteration of food supply. So it's really, so you've got some of these regulations like the hazard analysis critical control points. It's a generic term for preventive food safety. So most food manufacturers, certainly all the mainstream ones, are extremely careful about quality and safety and making sure that people's hygiene is high. If you've walked around a food manufacturing process, you've probably had to put hats on your head and maybe your feet and round your beard for the guys. And there's a lot of emphasis on safety and the avoidance, or the trying to avoid contaminating foods. So it's a lot of common sense, but there's significant regulation around about it. And then proper QA testing at multiple stages. So you might check the grain that comes in to make sure it's okay, or the grapes that come in aren't contaminated in some way, not just for flavor, but for health. And you do that with a lab. So you would take a sample. You might start making the food, because you don't immediately, you have to grow cultures and they take time. But if the cultures prove in that lab that that food's not up to scratch, you can still not release it from finished goods. You've got to check that test of the raw materials that went in and maybe intermediate stages. You check that before it's given to anybody who consumes it. So that requires traceability, laboratory quality assurance systems, all of which you would get in an ERP system. You won't get the laboratory testing, but typically you'll get a link to take the results. But the trick there is to not release it until you've got the results. And that can often hold product back. So that's sometimes not popular in the less formal sectors. Product batch traceability we've talked about. Certified suppliers and ingredients, even if you certify a supplier, certified supplier would be somebody that you've got a good relationship with and you've discussed quality in detail and you've worked procedures between you, and you maybe do some random checking between you to say that, yes, we're happy that these guys comply with whatever the FDA rules are, or your own personal rules, which could be tougher than the FDA. And you say they're certified, and then you won't check everything that comes in. You might just check it on a random basis. But in the food business, you know, that's fine if it's pistons coming to an engine manufacturer, but if it's food going to people, there's still a lot more quality checking goes on than random. And then the other thing about food security is you know, there's a lot of allergies, allergenics, allergies, ingredients that people don't want to eat because they either can't, or they have religious or cultural beliefs against those ingredients, or they feel that they only want to eat food that was properly organically farmed by people that were being paid properly. You know, children were in the fields. There's a lot of growth in information on the packaging of food and also the distribution packaging. So, you know, in food distribution, it's not just about sending the food. A lot of the information's on labels and packaging. And so you might have, you probably will have, when you want to make your packages, you buy them from a packaging company and you put your tomatoes in a box. That box will say, this is tomatoes batch 1, 2, 3. So the boxes have to say 1, 2, 3 because you can't stamp on every tomato. So the box says 1, 2, 3. And when you've run out of tomatoes, you don't just use the extra boxes you have with a 1, 2, 3 on it, because now batch 1, 2, 4 has arrived. You need a box that says 1, 2, 4, and you can't just score it out and put a 4. So you find there's a bit more scrap on packaging when you do that. Good for the packaging guys, but it's not just as simple as people think. A box is no longer a box and a label is no longer a label. And really, those are the things that I thought might be of interest to you. The food business, the food distribution business, is a lot more controlled and has a lot of potholes that you can fall into if you're not careful unwillingly. And so, you know, it doesn't do anyone any harm, I think, from any industry to go and walk through a food supply chain, because it's a pretty rigorous supply chain if you're going through the right place. And I would think that these are the things I thought might be of interest to you today. And that's me, Linda.
Thank you, Doug. Some very, very interesting points that you've highlighted, a couple of which, if we can delve into them in a bit more detail, I'd appreciate it. The first thing, I really thought such a good idea to plan your batch sizes so that you can deliberately avoid split batches or split pallets. Yep. I think that is such a simple thing, which could also really help people with traceability. Yep. Traceability is a big new buzzword in the food industry because of the new regulations, and a lot of people struggling with it. But something as simple as that could really help, you know, just manage the data associated with batches.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it does. So I think it's also more efficient from just a logistics point of view. It's better to have, especially the bulk logistics, easier to have pallets or boxes. You know, the worst one would be if you want 28 tomatoes and they're packed in 20s. So you get 20 tomatoes in a box and 8 in a bag. You know, yeah. By the time 8 in a bag get you, they're going to be smashed to pieces.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, in terms of traceability associated with your primary packaging, you're starting to lose that traceability because you're losing that, you know, the primary or even the secondary packaging. When it comes to the new regulation, so we now have this regulation 638, which is our hygiene regulation, and it now requires traceability throughout the food chain. Have you, as an organization, seen increased queries, increased inquiries regarding traceability as a result of this new legal framework?
Yeah, well, luckily for us, we had already received them probably before the regulations changed. And we've been increasing, we've got a quality module, but it's becoming more sophisticated because the requirements are more sophisticated. And you're right, people didn't see it as such a priority. They were more worried about their bottom line and the profit. And now they realize that quality and hygiene, traceability, all those things are critical. They always knew they were critical, but they're expensive. So, or they thought they were expensive. So yes, people talk more about quality now when they're selecting an ERP system, and even our existing customers are looking for more functionality in the quality assurance area. In other words, checking your quality right through the supply chain and having traceability. So yes, they're much more important.
I'm happy to hear that. I suppose the answer to the cost is, well, how much do you want to pay for a recall, you know, considering the listeriosis outbreak and what that recall actually cost?
Oh, you just have to look at enterprise foods. Do you see it anymore? So it wasn't the cost of the recall, it was the cost of not doing the recall fast enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's gone. The business is gone.
What's interesting is You made a comment with regards to the recall during the outbreak, and the difference between the way that retailers handled it. I think one thing that we are not very good at as the food industry is we're not good at publishing our recalls. Hopefully this will change with time, because as consumers, we need to have the confidence that when a recall does take place, the manufacturer or the retailer is doing it with our best interest, but they do have controls in place, and we can trust that they have got other products under control. I was very interested in your comments in this regard, because the perception can be, as you said, that, well, if they're not controlling this product, are they controlling any product? In which case, can I trust them?
Yeah, so that's another of these brand things. I thought it was all about brand there, because basically they are all doing it. You know, the people I spoke about are actually doing it, but you want to be sure they're doing it when people are dying. How many? 81 people died in that thing, I think, or more eventually. But
actually, over 200 people died. Over 200 people died.
Remember, so you know, so you're right. So these guys should be publishing that we're doing the right thing, you know, and I think, so that was my comment about packaging. We are producing products from the right type of environment, and we're doing all the right things. And in fact, waste, and if you don't eat it, this is what we do. You know, that's starting to go on the higher end, I suppose, the double income type of environment, the organic foods, those that are really organic. And they're publishing something, so the story is actually almost as much as the food, and people will pay a premium for that. And I think people will pay a premium also if you inform them, just like you said. I'm now comfortable that this place is doing the right things. I'm not sure about the guy next door. For the next 3 months, I'll go here.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I noticed I unfortunately missed your presentation at Food Next, and I'm sure you, Syspro, was at SAPEX. What are some of the new things we can expect to see in terms of distribution and logistics in the coming months, coming years? The fourth industrial revolution, everyone's talking about that. What's on the cards for warehousing and storage of food?
Well, on distribution of food, I think the biggest discussion at SAPEX was the fact that Imperial just closed down their consumer products division. And a large number of food companies in this country were very reliant on Imperial to distribute their foods to the retailers. So everyone, we even had one of the food manufacturers here yesterday talking to us about changing, because it's all the EDI. They have to change their EDI. Yeah. And one thing, now I'm just getting a prompt there. So that was one thing. So a lot of people are having to redo their logistics on the outbound side. What did you say there? Okay, so sorry, I was just getting a thing. But SAPEX also demand-driven MRP. So I mentioned the fact that doing your stock mix, getting your stock right, requirements planning, which we all do, is it's a piece of functionality in an ERP system that helps you maintain the right stock, depending on, on a number of factors. So it's a tool it's a module you use that requires a good planner, somebody who understands the products and the market they sell them to. And then that person can interact with the software quite well. Problem is, we sometimes don't employ good planners. And, it's like, if I sell you a hammer, you can use it to hammer in nails, but you might hammer in screws or just break walls down with it. I don't know what you're going to do with it. So if you're employing in a country like South Africa, where quite often we have lower skilled planners, they need something that's a bit more visual. So one of the things that came up was again, because it was there last year, was the demand-driven MRP. So MRP is what requirements planning is, material requirements planning. Quite a lot of discussion about demand-driven MRP. And we're also building that into our solution. It's not there at the moment, but it's a more visual way of helping planners plan stock. So, I think innovations all the time are coming. There was a nice talk about, which suited us, I guess, where they were talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning and where it can be useful. So if you think about, in our business, forecasting how much you're going to sell, forecasts are always wrong. The trick is to get them less wrong by doing the work. because the more uncertainty there is, the more stock you have to keep just in case. So if you can get more accurate, and that's a good application for artificial intelligence, or more so, that is almost artificial intelligence actually, forecasting. But machine learning would be, I'm learning all the time how I can get the forecast out, how I can forecast better. So the application of machine learning, was a bit of discussion, and there was some informal discussion about that as well. But there was quite a few discussions around general logistics. But as I say, the forced move from one third-party logistics service provider to others was quite a lot of the discussions over the beers, and was very interesting to see some companies just weren't that easily prepared to move.
Yeah,
it's a big job for them.
I think this is where, you know, integrating systems is really important, and also understanding, you know, how agile is your system, and what risks are there to your system. So, you know, what I'm taking away from your discussion today is you know, the food industry is quite a complex supply chain, but what I'm hearing you saying is really more about managing business risks. And that, you know, food safety, food, you know, making sure that we've got proper systems in place for food defense, those are important, but the actual stock management and the management of the systems are critical to ensure that your business is actually functioning effectively. And I think the point that you're mentioning regarding the third-party change in third-party distributor actually highlights business risk, not just a food safety risk.
There was another thing that came up, and I sort of threw that in my talk there. The wastage of food is huge. I mean, how can you lose a third of the food you produce in a country where maybe, I don't know, a third of the people hardly eat? It's insane. I mean, you can understand if it's milk and yogurt that goes off and it takes too long to distribute it, but we're not talking about milk and yogurt. We're talking about things like, if you want your pumpkin chopped and you buy it from Woolies and it's pre-packed and it's all chopped to save you a few minutes, you've probably lost 50% of the pumpkin before it gets in that bag. Now you have to hope that they turn the other 50% into soup or something, because I can't imagine that they throw it away. But people are actually prepared to pay for convenience. And I think some of the talks at Gallagher we had were, nobody defines what food waste is. Nobody really knows what it is. We know we're wasting, but what are the rules? How do we measure what we're doing? Because if we can't measure it, we can't do anything. And there was a lot of discussion about, well, what is it? I mean, we know what it is. We throw food away, or we lose food on the way. And there weren't a lot of people offering solutions. So that definitely is becoming, you know, obviously it's got a bottom line to it. If you get more consumable product at the end that you can sell as a food manufacturer or distributor, you get more bottom line. You stay in the game, you probably make more profit than the others. So I think food waste is a huge opportunity in the food distribution side of things. And all I said to that when we had a question was, you have to plan. You have to know what people need. So you have to get closer to what the demand for food is, your end consumption, and that has to come back up the supply chain so people aren't overproducing. I mean, the farmers, they were saying the farmers overproduce. Well, how do you tell a farmer who's got 25,000 hectares of land and he's got cattle on it, how do you tell him you can't produce cows, you've got to grow apples now? You can't. So there are constraints within our food supply chain that we have to get control of, and then we have to try and synchronize. I'm not saying we do it like a Soviet master plan, but there are huge opportunities for collaboration up and down the supply chain so that we don't waste so much food, you know, that we make more of the right stuff, or at least if we make it, we distribute some of it through another channel to feed people who need it, who can't pay for it, because it would have been wasted anyway. So there's a lot of opportunity, and even I was in Kenya last week, we were talking about that as well up there. So people are thinking smarter, I think, now, and how not to waste so much food.
Absolutely, and I think there's, you know, that's where, you know, an organization like yourself, systems, you know, can definitely assist us in making sure that we're doing the right things and understanding the problem, and then identifying the correct solutions. So yeah, there's a lot of discussion in that regard, and I look forward to talking to talking to you about that again in the future, and how the systems that Syspro provide can actually assist us with identifying and reducing food waste. Doug, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you for highlighting the important aspects of the food supply chain, what's important in terms of storage, distribution, areas that we should be looking out for. I think many of these are covered by audits, current audits that are taking place within the food manufacturing environments. But I think the importance of looking at it from a stock management perspective and actually moving money around your business has been very interesting this afternoon, and has just highlighted the importance of the synergy between food safety, food defense, food waste, and just running a business effectively and efficiently. Look forward to talking to you again. Thank you so much for your time.
Good. Thanks for you as well, Linda. Thanks.
Okay then. Thanks everyone. Chat soon. Look out for the recording.